Well, it's finally here. After selling pretty much the same ute for almost 10 years in Australia, we've now got a new Isuzu D-Max. And while lots of facelifts have been coming and going over the years, Isuzu tells us this one is all new. How new is it? Let's find out. Competition is as fierce as ever in the dual cab ute segment, and the previous generation D-Max was one of the oldest getting around. In order to stay competitive and relevant, Isuzu needed to make some big changes, and they've gone all out. This is an all-new D-Max. And I do mean all new. There's a new chassis, there's a new engine, new suspension, updated driveline. This new one does not share a single panel or piece of glass with the old model. In fact, there's only a couple of conrods in that engine that are carried over. Pretty impressive. So we've got a lot to get through in this review, and we want to cover off all the bases. So we're going to take it off-road, we're going to take it on-road, we're going to put some long Ks on this car and do a full run-through of the interior and all the technology this new D-Max has. While pricing starts from as little as $29,990 drive away for the two-wheel drive single cab traffic controller variant with a manual transmission, our test model is the new X-Terrain specification, which is the most expensive, $62,900, but it is launching with a drive-away deal of $58,990. It's worth pointing out that safety technology like a center airbag, autonomous emergency braking, lane keep assist, and speed sign recognition is standard across the range. One important thing to note is that Isuzu's active safety system, they call it IDAS, it's all running from these two cameras up in the windscreen there. That's important because it means there's no hardware down on the front here for fitting bull bars and that sort of thing. It will still work even if you've got aerials mounted to your car. I reckon that's pretty awesome. And with all of those changes under the skin, the D-Max does get a fresh look to match. I think it looks pretty good. It's a bit more aggressive and angular up the front here. These headlights are quite imposing, LEDs in this top spec model, and the grille is a bit more squat as well. Moving around to the side here, 18-inch wheels on this specification. Lower spec D-Maxes have 17s, but there is no 16s anymore, which is interesting, probably because there are bigger brakes in behind there on this new D-Max. Interesting wheel design. They haven't gone for the machine finish, and I have to say it's quite unique. This spec also has side steps. They're a plastic unit, maybe a little bit flimsy for off-roading, but it does make it a little bit easier to get into and out of the car. It's also worth noting the wheelbase of the D-Max has gotten bigger. This is an all-new chassis after all. However, the overall length has gotten shorter, so that means there's less overhangs front and rear. That's better for ride, better for load carrying, and also better for off-roading, so I think that's a good win. Seems to be all the rage these days, these sailplane style sports bars. This one is plastic. It's got a couple of little red stickers in there to add a bit of an extra effect. Take it or leave it, I think. There's also some stylistic little things on the rear quarters there, some wings or aerodynamic looking things. Quite unique again, but probably a little bit exposed for off-roading in my opinion. I think there's only so much you can do with the back of a dual cab ute. However, this one is updated compared to the old one. We've got new tail lights here and they've got a nice signature to them and they look quite nice in the dark. And this rear bumper has changed as well. It's a bit more square and sits down a little low as well. So I'd love to see what one looks like with some nice steel rear protection there. I reckon it'd be great for clearance. This tailgate isn't weighted like some other models, and as you can see, we've fitted a lot of camping gear in the back here. You do have a roller cover in this X-Runner model, however, it doesn't fit on top of all this stuff at the moment. So let's pull it out and we'll show you what the tub looks like empty. So there we have it. This is a drop-in tub liner. It's probably a little bit slipperier than the spray-in tub liners, but it does have thick ribs on it there, so I'm going to assume that it's quite strong. I'll show you this roller cover as well. Pull that along. That's lockable and it's also waterproof. You see these things here actually act to channel water out of the tub, so if it is raining, your gear will stay mostly dry in the back there. Close that. Now to lock this tailgate, it is lockable, but you need the key. Put the little lever there and pop your key out. There we go. Now that locks the tailgate. It doesn't work off central locking. And then the other key here is for the roller cover. Put that one in there. There we go. That's pretty secure and it's mostly waterproof as well. There's no 12-volt plug in the back of the D-Max, and we also noticed only 2 tie-down points at the back. The 3-litre 4-cylinder turbo diesel engine has been extensively updated. There's a new cylinder head and block, new turbo and new Denso fuel injection system. It now makes 140 kilowatts and 450 newton meters, running through a 6-speed automatic transmission. The first thing you'll notice, and you can probably tell from watching me here, is that it's much quieter than the outgoing model. The old 4JJ1 was a torquey, gruff engine, a bit tractor-like compared to other turbo diesels, especially seeing Utes become so much more refined lately. Well, this one has really jumped up towards the top of the class now. It's much quieter at idle. Under load, it's much quieter. It doesn't have that loud rattle that the old one does. I would say that this is probably a bit quieter than a Toyota Hilux, and right up there with a 2-litre Ford Ranger, which is towards the top of the class. This is a vast improvement over the old one. It's not the only thing to like about this engine though. It's still very familiar in terms of its power delivery. There's 10 kilowatts more than the outgoing model, so we've got 140 kilowatts here. Not a huge amount. There are Utes with more power out there and you don't have to look far to find those. But this is more about the torque and the general availability of torque through the rev range. Punching along a country bitumen road now, sitting on 70 k's an hour, and this thing's ticking over just above idle pretty much, 1300 RPM, something like that. And if you do squeeze the throttle a little more, it doesn't really change down gears. It just leans on that torque that it's got. There's 450 newton meters, which is the peak number. But Isuzu tell us that there's 300 newton meters from 1000 RPM. And then there's 430 newton meters available on a wide range either side of that peak range. So you're never without torque in this engine. It's not about revving, it's just about cruising along. And even if you're punching uphill, going a little bit quickly, it just seems to accelerate with a nice effortlessness. But the great thing is now you don't have to put up with all that noise like the old one. So you're kind of having your cake and eating it too with this new engine. We're matched up to an Aisin 6-speed automatic gearbox, which is once again very familiar. It's almost a carryover from the old D-Max, but it's been updated. It shifts slightly faster. It's got a new oil cooler and heater for towing and that sort of thing. It makes it a little bit more robust for heavy work. But it's all about just using the engine in the right points. It doesn't shift around a lot and it doesn't shift particularly quickly, but it is smooth and it's quite predictable. So I think it makes a great companion to this engine. The ride on this new D-Max is different as well. The suspension geometry has changed on the front there. They've moved the upper control arm higher up, which means the roll center geometry of this car has changed. And it does, when you go through a corner like this one, doesn't roll and tip on the front as much as the old one, and there's a stiffer sway bar up front as well. So it definitely feels a bit more car-like. Rear suspension, I've got a little bit of weight in the back at the moment, nowhere near full payload for this car, but it's just typical camping stuff. There's some firewood, there's a chainsaw, a swag, so probably a few hundred kilos in there, and that does help smoothen out the ride. Sharper bumps do translate into the cabin and you do get a bit of a wobble from time to time here and there, typical of most Utes in the segment, but this one is a definite improvement. Worth noting that this spec of D-Max, higher spec ones, and most dual cabs have a standard 3-leaf rear suspension. If you go to a single cab, more of a working Ute, you do get a heavy duty one, so presumably that's just a stiffer spring. We've got a little bit more comfort on our side with this setup, and I think it works quite well. Another big difference with this D-Max, there is a lot of new stuff going on with this car. Steering. Like many other Utes and modern vehicles, this has gone to electric power steering. So no more hydraulic feel to it. This is lighter at low speeds, 100%, but it also weights up a little bit around corners. You could argue that it feels a bit vague, to be honest with you. There's not a lot of feedback or response, I suppose you could say, going on when you throw it into corners. There is weight there, so it doesn't feel vague and it doesn't seem to understeer or anything like that too crazy. But it just does feel like there's a little bit of a disconnection there with the road. But you're being picky, right? This is a four-wheel drive Ute at the end of the day. It's not a sports car. Just come to quite a deep river crossing here before camp. It looks very deep. We haven't walked it, but we've seen a couple of cars go across. Looks like a firm base, but It's going to use every one of those 800 mils of wading depth that this D-Max has. Remember, it is about 200 mils better than the old one, but no better way to test it than actually driving through a river, and it's pretty nerve-wracking. I mean, the water might push the car around, it might get a bit of water in the intake, you never know what's going to happen, so we'll see how we go. Hopefully I'll make it through to the other side. Low range, going to stick it in first gear. Let's see how we go. Rocky bottom, so traction shouldn't be an issue. In we go, turn those parking sensors off. It's pretty deep there. Far out. Hear the water rushing around me here. Gonna dive through this bit here, a couple of ruts to get through. Jesus. All right, through the other side. I think we're good. Did it. I did it pretty well too. That was some bloody deep water actually. The D-Max felt really confident through there, didn't really put a foot wrong. Nice firm surface always makes a big difference in these conditions. But gonna go through again now. Let's see how we go. Same way, between the trees, through the rushing water. Far out, that is pretty deep. You've got to pick your line too, know where you're going. Feel the river push me along there actually in one spot. It's pretty full on. Nice. Good job. We've put up a camp, we're mostly set up, the fire's going in the background there, and I've got a moment here just to run you through the interior of this new D-Max. And good news is, nothing's really carried over from the old one. It was probably the weakest part of the old D-Max and what gave away its age so much. Nothing's carried over to this new model, and that's great news. We've got a big infotainment display here. Below that you'll see the dual zone climate control system and a good steering wheel here that's got a lot of buttons on it and a lot of functions and features that wasn't even heard of in the old D-Max. Some things have carried over, and that's mostly good things, like dual cup holders here that pop out below the air vents and this pop-up storage thing here, but thankfully it's so much better than the old one. This one actually works. You've got a spot here for your wallet and your keys and that sort of thing, a couple more cup holders here and a decent sized center console. The seats are a massive improvement over the old one. A bit of a bugbear of the old D-Max for me was thigh support and just general comfort. So you sit in them more. They've got a bit of bolstering and good adjustment as well. And of course, you've got tilt and rake adjustment on this steering wheel, so you can get dialed in behind the wheel quite nicely. In front of me here, between the Speedo and the Taco, I do have a small multi-function display, and using these buttons on the steering wheel, you can cycle through some pretty good information. It's not as good as a Ford Ranger Wild Track or maybe a Volkswagen Amarok, but I still think it's pretty good, and obviously a massive improvement over the old D-Max. There's a few functions there, but of course, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, that's wireless Apple CarPlay as well, worth mentioning. There's native navigation in this infotainment display. It's big, it's quite clear. You can dial up the brightness to suit your needs, and for most intents and purposes, it is quite good. A little bit behind the leaders in some respects, I suppose, but once again, this is such an improvement over the old D-Max. While it is a massive improvement, I wouldn't say it's the best interior out of a dual cab ute out there. There are a couple of very hard plastic surfaces floating around. I'm sure they're quite durable, and don't forget this is a dual cab ute at the end of the day. But some of the buttons probably feel a little bit cheap for what is a top spec ute. And don't forget the prices have gone up for this D-Max, so keep that in mind. The second row of the D-Max is much improved also. In terms of appointments here, you've got a couple of air vents and a USB point to keep people in the back happy, plus a little storage thing here. It's quite small, I'm not sure what you'd put in there, maybe some loose change or something like that, but if you've got some takeaway food, chuck it on the hook there, that's pretty handy. Plus you've also got these spots on the back of the seats. In terms of comfort and width, this D-Max is a bit wider than the outgoing model, so you should have more shoulder room in the back here, but leg room is quite good, headroom is good also, and if you've only got two in the back, pop down the armrest, you've got a couple of cup holders there. When passengers are out of the back, you do have some handy storage under these seats of the D-Max. These can flip up and out of the way permanently, and you've got some storage here. It's a 60-40 split, and there's another one in the back there, but this one's quite big. I reckon you could fit maybe a slimline battery and a controller in there if you were smart enough, or a bit of recovery gear or spares. There's also some room in behind here too. Not a lot, but it's handy nonetheless. The new D-Max gains 5mm of extra ground clearance over the old model, which is now up to 240mm. There's a 1.5mm steel bash plate underneath, and that 800mm wading depth we tested earlier is thanks to a redesigned air intake system. Despite the increased wheelbase, extra ground clearance has improved the breakover angle from 22.3 to 23.8 degrees. That gives you more ground clearance underneath the car and stops you from bottoming out going over hills. Off-road clearance at the front and the back of the new D-Max has also been improved with a 30.5 degree approach and 24.2 degree departure angle. The addition of a locking rear differential, which has an electromechanical engagement, makes the new D-Max a much better proposition off-road, and on paper at least, puts it back on par with the rest of the field. Isuzu tells us the off-road traction control system is updated as well, but let's see how much better it is. So, found a nice little challenge here to put the traction systems on this new D-Max to the test. Remember, we've now got a rear locker and there's also a retuned traction control system. So I've got my safety driver here. Sam, wait for the camera, mate. Gonna see how this thing goes. No locker, just traction control up this climb. Now it's pretty slippery. Got a couple of wheels in the air as well, so it'll be a good test. Give it a go. Struggling there, plenty of wheel spin. Now that's not going to do it. Now, worth noting, this is a better system than the outgoing one. However, it's not as good as others in the segment. I would say Toyota Hilux would still have the best one. But we've got the magic button. Put that rear locker in, let's see how we go. There we go, too easy. Like all dual cab utes these days, the D-Max isn't afraid to lift a wheel off-road. Adding in a locking differential and along with better ground clearances, this new D-Max is a definite improvement over the old model. How good is it compared to others in the segment? It is now on a level playing field, but we'll reserve judgment until we compare them all head to head, and we will in the near future. This D-Max is a real winner in my eyes. Isuzu has done a great job of addressing the big shortcomings of the old model with this new one. The interior, much more comfortable, a lot more tech, a lot more modern as well. And even though we don't have ANCAP safety ratings for this car yet, the D-Max should be one of the safest in its class. It's got a center airbag, it's got a lot of active safety tech on it, and it rides and drives a lot smoother and quieter than the old one. One thing I do like about it though is that it feels familiar at the same time. This isn't a ute trying to be a car or an SUV. It still drives like an old D-Max in a good way. It's got lots of torque, it doesn't need to rev, and it's got a relaxed nature about it, which I really like. And off-road, it's a winner. Rear locker, better traction control, all great things for an off-road four-wheel drive. I hope you like this video of the all-new D-Max, and we will have more content coming in the future. Tow tests, load tests, comparisons, all those good things. Let us know what you thought in the comments below. Hit subscribe, maybe that thumbs up button while you're at it, and thanks for watching.